But I think there is a sense by a lot of Christians that I've been in church my whole life. I've never heard this addressed, so therefore an answer doesn't exist. I just want everyone to know that's just not true.
Welcome back to the Maven Parent Podcast. And Strong Women Podcast. We're doing a little bonus episode to our conversation about gender with our husbands, Brett Kunkel, John Stonestreet. So on the Maven Parent Podcast, we talk mostly to parents, also grandparents, about navigating the culture, thinking about things that are happening through a Christian worldview, and then how on earth do we disciple our kids in this time, in this place. So the Stonestreets are good friends of ours. They are in it with us. They have 4 kids, 17 through 5, 3 girls and a little boy, Hunter. So Stonestreets, we wanted to talk to you guys about just formation and raising kids. And obviously with your work at Colson Center, you're aware more than most of the craziness of the culture. So why on earth would you bring kids into this world? You know, maybe we'll start there. Why did you? No. But so, you know, just practically thinking, did you want to say something?
Well, no. I was going to, no.
Okay. So just practically talking parents through, especially I'm thinking about parents with young kids, but also I know we have a lot of parents who listen that have teenagers too. So
what we're looking for are practical tips.
Mm-hmm.
Like so you know, you don't have to, we've talked through the ideas. We know but what are just some practical things that you guys have done as parents that you have found to be effective in discipling your kids in this crazy cultural moment? Got nothing?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. Well, and
I mean, are we talking about gender or everything?
So I'm thinking everything, like spiritual formation, helping them to form their views about reality that are true. You know, it's kind of like the Deuteronomy 6. Mm-hmm. I know you guys live this out. So it's like when we get up, when we lie down, when we're walking around. So, you know, what are some of the things you guys have done in that formation?
Go ahead.
You want me to go first? Okay. Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. The first thing is we don't let things go unnoticed in culture because culture is super powerful in catechizing them the wrong direction, not by being loud, but by making things normal. So classic example of this was the Beauty and the Beast real life remake, right? Which came after the Cinderella one, which was fantastic. It was better than the original. At the time, we had just the 3 girls, which meant everything in our house was dominated by the Disney princess marketing movement. And so, you know, here it's Emma Watson. Sorry, not Emma Thompson, that's somebody else. Here it's Emma Watson. It's going to be Belle. It's going to be awesome. And they build up this whole year of anticipation until boom, a month out, they say, oh, there's a gay moment. And you really, at that point, had 3 options. Number 1 is don't go. And a lot of parents made that choice. I think that's a legitimate choice. The other option is to go, but what to do when you're there. And I talked to a lot of parents who were like, yeah, they just didn't notice. And we didn't take that option because if you don't notice, then it's normalized. I wanted them to notice. I prepped them for noticing. I pointed out what they did and didn't notice, and we talked about it afterwards. And the reason is because the gay moment in a Beauty and the Beast movie was not nearly as important as the gay moment that they would have come across later on downtown in Colorado Springs, or every single time we board a Delta plane and there's that image, you know, in the jetways now. I don't want them to think things that aren't normal are. There is a real value as an individual and as a society in holding on to that kind of sense of moral resistance to something, that something is not right, something is not, even if you don't know, if you lose the sense to notice, that's a big deal. So we have a lot of conversations we never planned on.
That fits with one of the things that we talk about a lot in the parent podcast is narrating. Narrate for your kids what's going on. In fact, I like the maybe add the end there, notice and narrate, because that's what you guys did.
We didn't plan. It wasn't in our parenting plan to sit down when our girls were 10, 8, and 6 and talk about same-sex marriage. But we did because the Supreme Court decided. N.T. Wright says this. He says, you don't get to think. He He says, you don't get to choose what you think about as a Christian or talk about. The culture chooses that in a lot of ways. And I think that's a wise thing. And so here we are. Another thing, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just add, it wasn't our plan to talk to our youngest, who is 5. We're talking to all the other girls on the way home from church on Sunday about pronouns and all that. So we framed it more like the lie that we're not going to tell and that the culture is buying as truth. And he said, that is a bad lie.
Your 5-year-old.
that men and women don't matter, like our bodies don't matter. And so that was
that's some insight on how young we have to start.
Yeah.
With this. It's your 5-year-old,
Yeah.
and these are the kind of conversations that you've got to think about having with your 5-year-old in this day and age.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I know you guys do this too, but every question is up for grabs. They can ask anything. They can talk about anything.
You get rid of
We will
Sean's
talk about
face.
everything.
Yeah.
We just will. We'll just, we'll talk about it. We'll explain it. And you have to walk through carefully, as a 5-year-old, Hunter really needs to know that pirates don't live in Colorado because there's no water. He's afraid of that. Allie needs to know something else, and we're just as honest as we can be on kind of those questions.
Although I did make up a story because Anna's boss has a parrot, and he walks around with a parrot. And Hunter said, I don't think he's a pirate because he doesn't have an eye patch. And I said, I'm pretty sure he is. So I may have ruined that.
So Hunter's reprobate
so
now.
good.
Hunter's already in counseling. He's doing intense therapy. Well, here's a follow-up question to that is what gives you guys the confidence to be able to say, because I think there's a lot of parents out there who would be afraid to say, hey, anything's on the table. Let's talk about anything. What gives you the confidence to be able to do that?
Well, I think I should talk to this because I think John is rightly has confidence to talk about this because he's so good. He's so gifted at getting past smoke screens and getting down to the heart of the issue. And I've learned a ton. In fact, when he was explaining the Bergefell decision to the girls, I almost made him stop and go get a notebook because I just love the way he explains things. So I think he has, he just is good at that. And I'm learning from watching him take on these challenges. But I also try not to shy away from them myself. And I'm more of a crockpot thinker, so I do need a minute to think about it. But I tell my kids that. I say, that's a great question. I want to address that, but I'm going to need a minute to think about it. If it's really a complex question, I'll say, let me go read more about that. I do know the right people to ask. Let me go listen to something. And maybe we listen to it together. Maybe we read something together. The other thing I try to do is tell them the things I'm learning because I feel like I'm very much in this learning with them. I'm further along, so it's a mentoring kind of learning. But so I don't have confidence that I've got it right away, but I have confidence that there is an answer to be found, and that that I know people who have thought about this, or I know resources to find, and that it is okay for me to say, I don't know. And I think it models for them that it's okay that they don't know, but this is what mom does to find out. And so I'm confident in saying I don't know, but definitely not staying there. And
I think that's a really good practical step for parents.
Yeah.
To be able to admit that. And then you don't feel like you're on the spot all the time.
Right.
It's okay that you don't know, but there's hey, if Christianity is true, I'm confident there's going to be answers out there. Now, you guys both are readers as well, so you're proactive in equipping yourself, right?
Yeah, but I'd add a couple things. I mean, one is, look, parents just need to know this is the golden age of answers. This is what many Christians don't know. If there is a tough question, it has been asked and it has been answered. It might be by some, nerd in a corner of a seminary somewhere. It might be a book that's kind of hard to understand. But I think there is a sense by a lot of Christians that I've been in church my whole life. I've never heard this addressed, so therefore an answer doesn't exist. I just want everyone to know that's just not true. Mm-hmm. There is a million of these questions that have been wrestled with and that have been answered, so it's accessible.
Let me take that to promote the Breakpoint commentary.
Yeah, we try to do that.
If you haven't signed up for Breakpoint as a parent, you should be getting that commentary delivered to your email inbox every day, because this is where you guys are addressing all these cultural things, and you're helping people get in touch with the resources that are out there.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we want.
Welcome,
I love. Well, thanks. But I mean, I hear this all the time. Like people come up and say, This is how we talk about these things to my kids. They know at dinner we're going to read through the Breakpoint, and I think that's super cool. Or this is what we do for family devotions, or this is what, and I just think that's great. Another thing I think is important is that we don't, when we're addressing something, that we don't stereotype the other position or create a straw man and beat it to death. Mm-hmm. I think this is a real problem. Even those that have confidence, one of the things we really try to do with our kids, I try to really do, is take very seriously why someone would believe something different, and to walk them through that. I remember when we first had the conversation about Obergefell and saying, this is what the Supreme Court decided, that 2 men should get married to 2 women. And Anna of course, she was only 8 at the time, but she was like, what? No one would ever do that. Like there was just this moral reaction. And we were like, no, many people would. And here's why. And we walk through, this is why some people think that. And of course, that's only increased as we've continued to have these conversations, mainly because I want to humanize the other position, but also because it doesn't do us any good to beat up a caricature of something, at least not in the long run. This is what happened on the science question for a long time, is parents painted. This is what happened in the science question for a long time, is, Christian leaders who painted evolutionists as idiots. And then you meet an evolutionist who's not an idiot, and by the way, he has the power to give you an A or an F, and suddenly their position becomes much more socially acceptable than it was when you were in your home. So we've got to take the debate and those questions into a larger context. Mm-hmm. The last thing that came to mind here that I think is just really important is that question confidence. I don't always have confidence that I know how to answer something. I think Sarah's strategy of, and it's really important, being able to say, I don't know. But I think what drives me more than confidence is urgency. Here's what we need to know. If our kids ask us a question and we don't answer it, or we don't address these things in our culture, that brings up 2 things. Number one, it gives our students the impression that Christianity has nothing to say about most of life. I think a lot of kids get that impression. Their church never talks about this issue, that issue, this issue, that issue, this issue, that issue. Their parents don't ever talk about these issues in regards to faith. So what's the assumption? Christianity has to do with this, has nothing to do with the rest of this. So that's way more damaging than saying the wrong thing, trying to answer a question. The other thing that happens is, and just know this, if you're not willing to answer these questions or to address these topics or to point out these things, somebody is. There's not a silence on these issues. So they are hearing from somebody. And those will become the authoritative sources, whether it's Google or whether it's, a TikTok influencer, or whether it's just a popular voice in culture or some way of spinning the narrative. It'll become authoritative. Mm-hmm. So we've got to. It's not a question of confidence for me so much as it is, gosh, if I don't do this, it's worse than if I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I know that you do well, Sarah, is that you listen well to your kids too. And so when questions come up or when conversations, you're asking, of course the girls more now because Hunter's only 5, but like, okay, so why are you asking that? Or what are your thoughts about that? Mm-hmm. And listening to your girls, because sometimes our kids come to us with questions and we think it's, oh, good, I've prepared for this question. Yeah. And it wasn't actually the question, or there was something underneath that, and so they keep coming to us if we listen to them. If we take their ideas seriously and sometimes put it back on them too. Like I'm thinking of one time our oldest daughter, Lexi, came home from school, and I think it was her sophomore year in high school. And in her English class, they watched this video about the overpopulation of the earth, and her teacher said in the class, it's really irresponsible to have more than 2 kids, and really we should only have one. People should only have 1 kid. Well, Lexi's sitting there in a family of 5 kids, so we've really blown it, right? And so she came home kind of disoriented from this teacher, and I was cooking dinner and, kind of in the middle thing. And then she just came in and said, Mom, what do you think about the overpopulation of the earth? And I was like, what? And she tells me this story, and I haven't done a lot of research on the overpopulation of the earth. So I said, well, what do you think? And she was like, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem like our family's irresponsible because we had 5 kids. I mean, you and Dad are taking care of us. And and then I had to think about it too. But a little while later, I said to her, hey, Lex, I mean, we've been on a lot of road trips. Our family does a lot of road trips because there are so many of us and plane tickets are expensive. So we drive a lot of places. Pretty much when we get out of Southern California and you think about the landscape that we see, does it seem like the earth is overpopulated? I know your teacher showed you a video of Tokyo and Beijing and Los Angeles. And anyway, so then we had this good conversation about, actually, just in America alone, there's so much land that no one lives on. And
that stretch from Victorville to Vegas is just barren. No human life there.
There's a reason there's no human life. It's not even much life there.
But it led to a really good conversation. And I know that you do that with your kids as well, of just, having a conversation. When these things come at us, we don't have to be afraid or think, oh shoot, I haven't read the book on that or done all the research.
Well, I think part of that is remembering that they are members in the kingdom of Christ, and they're, it's not like you have to reach a milestone before you can participate. Like they're participating once they believe in Christ. But anyway, so I think in my mind, I feel like approaching it more like I'm mentoring them, and I do want to listen to what they're saying, and I want them to be able to flesh it out and narrate their thoughts, because we know that as they articulate their beliefs, it settles in even more, if they're able to say, and then they're able to get pushback, like, well, maybe that's a stretch, or here's a different thought on that. They're able to articulate that themselves, and it sinks in even deeper into their hearts.
All right, last question. So some of the stuff we've been talking about is reactive, to what's going on. But is there anything you guys have done very practically that's a little more proactive? Like, do you sit down and do a family study time or devotion or anything like that? Is there anything just really practical you guys do as a family to kind of this ongoing discipleship?
I was thinking to add on to what he's saying, like some of the habits that you guys do as a family, with the kids individually. I know you guys do things as a family as well, but just to help parents see, there are things we need to do, like Brett said, offensively, like building into our kids. Family habits.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go? Okay. In Roger's book, The Benedict Option, which he got a lot of pushback for, but one of the things that I love that he talked about is in a culture that's promoting this narrative that is opposite of what we know produces human flourishing. We can't just let that go. We have to build into our homes and our children's hearts the truth, and we have to be really proactive about it. But anyway, he's talking about how in a culture like ours, our homes should look like mini monasteries, and think of it in the way of like what monasteries were originally intended for, was to teach through prayer and work. And not just to stay within the bounds of that monastery, but it was work and prayer for the life of the community. And so, with that in mind, just trying to set rhythms that draw our hearts towards the truth. And so we're very active in our church, and I think we've worked real hard to orient our lives around the church calendar and the church community. So I think that's huge. And in fact, we couldn't go to a thing last night that our church was having, and our kids actually wanted to go on their own, which was really...
And it wasn't a youth event.
No, it was evening prayer and a potluck. So I guess maybe the potluck was enticing, but but the prayer, like they serve in the church, they sing at the church, they So I mean that's the first thought. There's lots of little things, because it's the little things that continue to grab our hearts and shape them. But
well, I think that's huge in this day and age. A lot of families are not committed to the local church and involvement in there.
But it's not more than just attending. It's orienting around the church, right? So you're oriented around something. You're oriented around sports, or you're oriented around something. And the church has been really helpful. And it's a multi-generational approach to church, which has been great. Mealtimes are really important. And every data point says mealtimes are the greatest predictor, other than mom and dad are still married and in the home with kids. Mealtimes they just make all the difference in the world. And so that's a really, I think, important part of our rhythm as well, is that's pretty practical. From the very beginning too, how we thought about and talked about scripture with them, we're never like great in terms of like family devotions and things like that. It always happens and stops and starts with us. But from the very beginning, introducing scripture to them as the story of reality, and not just a collection of stories with good moral points. Yeah. That is huge, because we realize their first introduction to Scripture is going to stick with them. And if they think, oh, this is kind of like every other storybook that they get as a kid, Aesop's Fables or whatever, where the story is to make a moral point, as opposed to this is actually true. This is actually real. This is actually who God is. This is actually... So I think that's been really helpful for the kids. As a point of, that's just kind of been a consistent thing for all of them. It was very different than how I was taught the Bible, and I think it's been pretty sticky for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very helpful stuff. We will be watching your kids carefully so that we can judge whether or not you've been successful in raising them. No, we know you're the Stonestreet kids well. We already see the fruit of your parenting. So thank you for sharing some of that wisdom with our audience.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.